tato, and thanks for having me. Public service announcement before I start. This morning we recorded minus 10.1 degrees at our Middlemarch station, which is provisionally the coldest May temperature since 2001. So I'm usually based in Auckland, so the coldness here is a big deal for me today. So I'm not sure if I'm shaking because I'm up here because of the temperature. But I'm here today to talk about a new partnership that we have with the Department of Conservation in terms of weather forecasting. Don is around who can answer any questions about the procurement process, but basically this time last year, DOC put out an RFP for weather forecasting services. We applied. We got it, and we officially launched services on the 2nd of March, so not too long ago. So a lot of this stuff is very fresh. So I wanted to share with you what we've been doing to date, and also about some of the things in the works for the future, and also a little peek behind the hood in terms of what our forecasts kind of comprise of. All right, so the service overall, so there's kind of two parts. There's stuff that we do for DOC staff, that's internal. So for the DOC attendees in the room, they're aware of, they get access to NIWA Forecast, which is a forecasting software. There's a caller forecaster service that they can use, and we're also working towards a roadmap of lots of other services. So there's a lot of stuff that kind of happens that people don't know about. And the stuff that you guys would see is what we're doing in the public realm, and mostly in regards to a new part of our website. I actually have in my pocket, my colleague of mine was like, you need to do mountain puns, and he sent me some really terrible ones, so I'm just going to insert one here. So the NIWA Weather website will give users the peak experience. I take no responsibility for these. So I thought I'd give you a bit of an intro into the website. If you want to follow along on your phone, then raise it now and scan that code, and you can use it on your phone. But the website is weather.niwa.co.nz. That's our general website, and now there's a whole parks component. I'll keep it up there for now. So as I mentioned before, this launched on the 2nd of March, and there's a few things that are still kind of in the works or improvements, but we're always looking to make more changes, and I'm always keen to hear any ideas that people have. So the first part of the website is you land on what we call kind of the national landing page. Here you can see the locations where there are forecasts. Currently there are 49 forecast locations, which will be going up to 70 in the next couple of months, so just waiting for DOC to confirm those. There is a video there that's updated every day around 3-4 p.m. and that's presented by a NIWA meteorologist, and this is it's a weather overview but with an outdoor user in mind. So we'll highlight any particular weather hazards that might be active. So that's something to watch, or at least tell people to watch if they want to get an overview of the weather. And yeah, here it's mostly a navigation thing where you can choose the location either by the map or the drop down that came up before. If you land on you can choose a national park, and you can land on what we call the park page. So on the park page, you get a quick little 2-day overview of the forecast for the locations within the national park, and you can kind of see them there. We have a video on the park pages as well. Now this is not presented by a meteorologist, it's presenter-less, but the focus is on the park. So if you want to see what the forecast is doing, this is from our high resolution model, it's showing you specifically for that park what's happening throughout the day. So it covers rain, snow, we've got wind gusts shown here. And one of the kind of cool features as well is we've also incorporating our river flow modeling as well. So it's a qualitative look at it. It's showing our flow is going to be above normal, below normal, near normal. Some people have messaged from that run, say the Wanganui River Tours, and said, well, I want to know like what's the height of the river, or how many cumecs if you're a kayaker. So it doesn't go into that kind of detail, but from a safety perspective, it's meant to just give you a quick look and say, our river flow is going to be high. You know, if there are river crossings on my journey, is that something I should be aware of? I have no control of this video, so it's just showing features, but I will cover them off. So the other kind of things on the park page that was just shown, there is a print summary. This is currently getting a facelift, and a new one will be launched in, I think, about a month or so. The summary is just a summary of the park information that you can print it out, put it on the wall, or even save it on your phone if you're going to be going somewhere else. What other features do we have here? Yeah, so the video is currently every national park has a regional video that covers the park area, and I think the end of that video showed that there is a broader scale outlook as part of the day. This thing here is updated at the moment twice per day, but will probably increase because our models run 4 times a day. After the park page, you can get site-specific information for your forecast location. So this is where the most granular information lives. You have a table of information for lots of forecast variables. So you've got your temperature, your wind chill, wind speed, wind direction, and then you've got things like humidity, visibility, and for the first, I think, 72 hours, the information is hourly, and then you jump to 3 hourly information. Another thing that we have is weather hazard alerting. So this is quite interesting. So it's site-specific, and we cover things like rain, wind, low visibility, low temperatures, and high temperatures, which happen occasionally as well. So the thinking behind this is we wanted to not just present a table of numbers, but we wanted to highlight values that users should kind of going to draw their eyes to and think about what that might mean for them. So if you click on one of the hazards, it actually gives you information on what that hazard means. So for example, what does it mean if there's low temperatures, that there is a risk of hypothermia, that you should have extra clothes with you, if there's strong winds that might make it very difficult to walk. So, I mean, you guys are not really the target audience for this because you're expert outdoors people, but this is a website for the general public to help people understand that weather can be a hazard and what is particular aspects of the weather that they should consider as part of their trip. So we do the hazard stuff for the first 3 days of the forecast, and then if you go to day 4, 5, and 6, it kind of tells you to check back. And the reason behind that is with weather forecasting, you start to get a bit more uncertainty as you go further out in time, and we really just want to encourage people to always check back and look at the most recent information available, because this thing here is updating constantly. Anything else about hazards? Yeah, so okay, so that's kind of the website in a nutshell. Have a look around. I will now jump into what's happening behind the hood. How do we get to that forecast information? And a big reason we're able to do this is because NIWA has 3 supercomputers as part of its kind of asset base, and you need to have a bed at least that long to work in our high performance computing facility. So so I'm not sure, some of you may know how weather modeling works. I've definitely spoken to a few weather nerds yesterday, but basically modern forecasting relies on supercomputing power, being able to run weather models, and essentially you understand all the physics of the atmosphere, and you need to put in some things that you know about. This is what's happening with the atmosphere right now, and you apply those for that physics and calculations, and then you can see what's happening out in the future. So that's just a really kind of crude overview of modeling. So what we're doing at NIWA is the inputs themselves, well, we have quite a lot of observations. Jono talked about the snow and ice network. There's a lot of weather stations. There's a lot of other stations around the country. So all of these types of observations feed into the model. In terms of weather modeling, one of the most important inputs for weather models these days is actually satellite information. So a lot of the skill comes from satellites. And the other really important input for weather models is planes as well. So especially commercial planes that take on and land, they're collecting information about things like temperature and humidity as they go through the atmospheric profile. So knowing stuff about the surface is helpful, but the bulk of our weather happens not at the surface, it's in the kind of the layer above us. So getting information about the whole atmospheric column is really powerful for models. So that was one of the things that was actually disrupted by COVID. The number of international flights dropped, so the observations that fed global models also decreased. So there's a lot of interesting studies that came out looking into, did forecast quality decrease, and there were instances where that seemed to be the case because we had this drop in the number of observations in global models. So the other thing that NIWA does is we are part of what's called the consortium. So we're part of this, we feed into what's called the Unified Global Model, and that is run by the UK Met Office. And NIWA contributes to the development of that model by offering science time, and we're kind of part of their suite of models. So globally, there are what are called global models. Global models cover the whole globe, and they offer forecasts for the whole world. For them to be able to do that, they need to be quite coarse. So the unified model, the Global, currently has a horizontal resolution of 10 kilometers. So basically it means they've just chopped up the Earth into 10 kilometer squares, and you have to assume that that square is almost like you average it out. So if you've got elevation in there, you have to average the elevation of, so it's quite a coarse square. If you are a user of something like Windy, I know there's a lot of people have their own like weather tools that they go to. So Windy, you can see the GFS model or the ECMWF, and you're looking at the global models. They're around this kind of resolution, so a kind of coarse model. So you can get pretty good detail out of them at a big picture scale, but in New Zealand here we've got the Southern Alps, and if you average 10 kilometres square of the Alps, you're not going to get a very high peaks. It would certainly make climbing them a bit easier, but that's not the case. So what we do is we need a higher resolution than that to be able to resolve the terrain and to get information about what the weather's actually doing at a more local scale. So at NIWA we run what we call the NZ-LAM, New Zealand Local Area Model, at a 4.4 kilometre resolution, so from 10 to 4. Now, we can't run it over the globe because even with the bearded man that runs the supercomputer, that would just take too long. We don't need to. So we just run it over a smaller area, and at the boundaries of that square, the boundary, what's called the boundary conditions, comes from that global model. So we get the global kind of boundary conditions, and then we kind of spin up our own modeling there. But that's not all. There's more. We do it again. We do it a third time to get an even higher resolution model called the New Zealand Convective Scale Model, run at 1.5 kilometre resolution. So this is New Zealand's highest resolution weather model running operationally. That was, I guess, not a true statement early in the year when we were operationally running a 333 metre model for Emirates Team New Zealand, but that was only over the Auckland region. So I guess at a national scale, this is New Zealand's highest resolution weather model. 1.5 kilometres is, when you're talking about, I'll get to that in a minute, but when you're talking about low, like on the ground, that still can be quite coarse. But at this kind of scale, we're now resolving quite a lot of the detail that you can't get when you're looking at the global picture. You can get the main feature placement will be the same, but if you're looking at kind of detailed stuff, you're not going to get that. So let's do a game here. I think I might fail this game myself. One of these is a satellite picture. One is the NZCSM, New Zealand Convective Scale Model at 1.5K. Hands up if you think that the left picture is the model. Okay, one, two, three. Right one. Okay, you guys, yeah, you win. So that's right. I mean, there's a saying in the modeling world, no model is right, but some models are useful. And you can see here that they're not picture perfect, right? And in fact, especially to the west of the South Island, there's a lot more cloud predicted than actually occurred, but you're getting the right kind of physics happening, and for me, being able to see that level of detail, you start to understand what's happening in the atmosphere. You see the bubbly clouds, that's kind of more convective clouds, that's a cold air mass. You're starting to understand the physics behind what's kind of happening there. You don't get that kind of detail when you start going coarser. So it's similar with the LiDAR scanning results that we saw yesterday, just so much detail when you look at that high resolution that you're not going to get if you use contours to make your digital elevation model. So the high resolution model, it allows us to resolve some of New Zealand's complex terrain. And this is output from March 2019, a really impressive day when this run came in, because the purples at the very top are more than 700 millimeters of rain over our highest elevations, and that's a 48-hour total. We don't see numbers like this very often. In fact, I think that one there caught our attention because I don't think we'd ever really seen a forecast with such high rainfall accumulations. And then 2 days later, after this came out, we had this, which was the Waiho Bridge washout. And at our weather station at Crop Waterfall, 1,086 millimeters of rain was recorded in 48 hours, which became New Zealand's new 48-hour rainfall total. So, yeah, really impressive stuff. And there was widespread amounts at high elevation of more than 700 millimeters, as we just saw. But if we looked at the maximum numbers, there were places that had over 1,000. So we were expecting some places to get over 1,000 millimeters in 48 hours, and that is what occurred. So I guess kind of really this is the impact, but it's good for us to know that that kind of the resolution of that model is doing a good job in it to capture these kinds of events. So the reason that NIWA's been doing forecasting for a long time, you may have not really heard about it, but it's kind of embedded in all the research that we do, and it feeds into all of the other sciences that NIWA does, and one of that is related to hydrology. So this is from that same event, and it was showing forecast river flows, and you can see along the west coast how they were meant to be very high, basically, and it was like in the 99th percentile. For that area. So that modeling with the rain goes into forecasting flows as well, and that's how we're able to do that video that I showed at the start with the flow forecasting. It is coupled with the rain forecast as well. And all of the weather modeling goes into other things as well. So for America's Cup for Emirates Team New Zealand, the wind from our 333 meter model fed into a wave and current model, which we're running at 78 meters. So it's kind of the backbone of a lot of different science and a lot of different things that we do. So it's really exciting to be able to apply the science with the Department of Conservation, kind of deliver that as a service. So the model, as we talked about, is gridded, a 1.5 kilometer scale, but we can get better than that at a site-specific scale, particularly if we have observations. So where we install weather stations, we can use the observations to kind of train the model and give it an even better output. Something that we call MOS correction. It's a form of bias correction. So as an example here, this is a forecast for Mueller Hut, and it's basically both observations and the forecast together, and you can kind of see how closely they align. So if there were constant biases, say temperature was always too warm, then the forecast of that site would be adjusted. One of the things that we've actually seen with the Mueller Hut forecast and the bias adjustments that have been applied because we have observations there is that we get a lot of the predominant wind direction there is a southwesterly. And it's interesting if you just look at model output raw, uncorrected, for a site like that, you get a lot of northwesterlies. And that was one of the feedbacks from the VCs is like, everyone else saying northwesterly, why do you have southwesterlies? It's like, well, because of the way the wind kind of wraps around there, it's actually observing southwesterlies there a lot of the time. And so that even though our raw forecast may have been a northwesterly at that site, the bias correction adjusts for the terrain. So it becomes a site-specific forecast, even though the grid 1.5 kilometers might be northwesterly at that particular point, we're able to bias correct it more. So that's one of the things that we've been doing a lot with the, out of the forecast sites we have on the website. Some of them have observations. We're very fortunate to have observations at Muir Hut and down in Mount Cook Village. Some of them unfortunately don't have observations, so we can't do that kind of bias correction. But there's two of those kinds of processes going on there. So another, that's kind of status quo, but I always, we don't want to really deliver a static service where this is it and this is what we're doing with DOC, and I can give the same presentation in 6 years' time and it'd still be valid. We're always looking at ways to improve the science, improve the service, and do something better. So what's happening at the moment is a big thing in the, I was going to say forecasting world, but you guys are forecasters, but you're avalanche forecasters, and you're probably like, this is not a big thing in our world. It's ensemble forecasting. So with models I talked about, we run that model at a high resolution one time, but 4 times a day, and that takes quite a bit of time to run the supercomputer, several hours. But what we can also do now is run that model in a little bit of a coarser resolution at say 2 kilometers, but let's run it 18 times. And of those 18 times, let's just vary the starting conditions a little bit. So we know one of the things we do worst in terms of modeling is understanding what's happening right now. We don't often get like time number 0 correct, and that can make a difference to your forecast going forward. So if you alter that right now a bit, and then you run your models 18 times, and then you can see what is the spread. Do they all still kind of end up at the same point, and then you can have pretty high confidence in your forecast? Or is there a lot of divergence, so that you might say, okay, well maybe the outcome is not as good. So at NIWA we're now running an ensemble. It's not operational yet, but it's been running our test system for over a year. So us as forecasters look at it. And what it allows us to do is say, instead of saying, what is the forecast at this point, the question becomes, what is the chance of, say, wind gusts being more than 70 kilometers per hour? And we can look at the distribution for that. We can also do things like, let's combine all of the members and say, what is the average snowfall amount from all of those forecasts over New Zealand? This is not today, by the way, for those wondering about snow over the weekend. We had to have our presentations done by Monday, so I couldn't use, the actual forecast. Or let's say some other artificial thresholds. So say, what are the chances of more than 3 centimeters of snow, or more than 15 or 30? So we can start to see, it's tricky from a communication perspective, probabilistic forecasts, but the richness of information is much deeper there, and it goes towards understanding confidence in a forecast. So we're hoping that this is the type of information that will start to become part of the under the hood part of some of our services, including the stuff that we're doing with the Department of Conservation and that public website. I already showed you that there was kind of values that were highlighted as risk. So the hope is that we will be using some of that probabilistic information to express risk, but there's lots of opportunities. The same type of approach is also done with our hydrological modeling, the flow modeling. Say we used all of those rain outputs, and then so what happens with the streams and river flows? How do the outcomes diverge? So that's a really big area of science that's happening at NIWA. And then what else? So there's a few things in the short term coming that we're working with DOC on. So one, I mentioned the print summary. So that's something that's getting a facelift over the next month and a bit. And so that's something that people can save on their phone or print out and display somewhere. And the other thing that's happening over the next couple of months is we'd like to have widgets of our forecast information. So if you're a concessionaire or you run tours or something everywhere and you want to embed that weather forecast information on your own website, then you'd be able to grab that widget and just chuck it on there as well. So those are the two kind of shorter term things happening. That's all I have, other than my colleague's terrible pun. He wrote, to conclude, "We may be the brains behind the operation, but you are the eyes and mountaineers." So, I'll tell him you laughed.
Awesome, that was great. Does anyone have any questions for Nava? Yep.
Excellent presentation. The one, dare I say it, glaring omission to me as someone who's used your competing products, much like everyone in this room with Met Service, is a daily synopsized statement written by a meteorologist to back up all your data. Because it's all well and good to have a whole sheet of data and numbers and graphs. It's brilliant. But what a lot of us in this room as mountain professionals enjoy, and also, dare I say it, recreationalists in general, like to have a daily statement that synopsizes all the comings and goings of the weather, and it seems like that's not present.
Yeah, I've had a lot of conversations about this. So there's a couple of things coming. So firstly, in the print summaries, the individual locations will have text forecasts, but they will be automatically generated. I guess the battle for me around that was that some people like that big regional statement, and then others say that's not specific to me. Or getting like a big statement about Fiordland, but then that's not really going to be necessarily valid for if you're in a particular part. I guess the counter to that is that we do the video, the national overview video with a NIWA meteorologist. So it's not a written forecast, but it is a spoken one with the NIWA meteorologist, where there's, if you're after any kind of big picture stuff or any key messaging, that's where it comes out there. So yeah, it's a tricky thing because I understand that's valuable, but we don't run a forecast floor of 50 forecasters to write text forecasts. It's a very expensive thing to write, and it's always a balance between providing specific information for lots of locations versus generic information for a large location. So it's like, what's more useful, because they don't really coexist very well.
Yes, fantastic presentation. Thanks very much, coming from a bit of a geek and a nerd. So that was great. Question about the site-specific forecast where you're getting corrective biasing. How would a member of the public understand that you're getting those site-specific information and that it is biased, or that you've got a corrective bias in there? So, for example, Muirlahart forecast northwest gale, you've got southwesterlies coming in at Muir. Yeah,
I mean, I guess it's... I'm not sure. I guess it's not really, we're not really communicating that it's just our best available forecast. So that's what we are forecasting as the situation. And I think for a user it gets tricky if you're using a multitude. I guess a lot of people heading into the outdoors, me included, will look at a lot of different models and guidance and try to understand the difference. And that has been one of the challenges, I think, is because we are doing high resolution forecasting, that some of the differences between forecasts is just because of that. So I'm not really sure. I guess if you have any ideas of how to kind of communicate that, but we're always displaying what we believe is the best available forecast for that.
No, that's not. So I'm asking, at those locations that have that specific information,
right,
is there something that says this is actually what is happening on the ground because of the terrain?
Okay.
So because members of,
so you want to know which ones are the ones that are corrected because there's observations versus the ones that are not. Okay. Currently not saying, of the 49 that we're currently doing, there's only 5 that are corrected, which would be Muirlahart, Mount Cook Village, Milford Sound, Nelson Lakes Visitor Centre, and Tongariro Visitor Centre, basically. Yeah. It's not many of the actual mountainous ones, unfortunately, which is where the really interesting weather happens. Yeah.
Thanks for the great presentation, and enjoy the puns as well, I must say. So we are notoriously bad at understanding probabilities as humans, and I guess my question to you is around from your experience, how do you best communicate uncertainty around your models? So you talked about those ensemble models, which is awesome. And beside probability, how do you go about communicating uncertainty around the models, whether in the maps and maybe giving hints for people about how to do that in forecasting?
It's a huge science, and I'm not going to pretend to be an expert in it because it's a social science, and I think language and colour and all of those things are really important. I know that a lot of weather forecast information, when you look at it, they try to include percentages, and there's a lot of papers on using percentages to communicate probability where people have different understandings of what a 50% chance is. And it comes back to the kind of stuff that Don actually talked about risk and perceived risk. And if you say, oh, there's a 50-50, some people will, I think if there's a 50% chance of a weather event happening, I'll probably say, oh, that's pretty high. Whereas someone's like, no, 50-50. So the percentages, I think, are quite flawed. So we've stayed away from that and used more qualitative language, like some medium, high chance. Now, once again, that's not very clear cut, somebody's perception. We just talk about what moderate risk means for avalanches. So someone's perception of moderate. So I'm not really sure the science community has really solved that one, and I think it depends on the application. What we've tried to do is we just want to highlight that there is risk and there's a gradient of risk. Your perceptions of that are still going to be different depending on how you kind of read that, and also your own vulnerabilities. I was telling a friend of mine about some of the thresholds that we have about winds and things like that, and she kind of laughed because she does a lot of hiking. She's like, oh, that's nothing for me. So, her saying, oh, there's a high risk of winds gusts over 80k, she's like, look at this video of me and the Tararuas, we're almost blown away. So it depends on the purpose of your communication, I think. And for us, we just really want to highlight values that people should stop and look and be like, oh, I didn't really consider that. Or there's a big sunshine there, looks great, but actually there's some risk and it turns out it's really cold. So I think it just depends on what you're trying to communicate.
Do we have any more questions? We have a little bit more time. Yep. Who was it? Oh, yeah.
Yeah, thanks for the presentation. It's quite amazing the amount of data you guys have access to. I've only started to familiarise myself with that website during the summer. I was working on one of the dock tracks. Is there an easy way to access information on cloud cover on your website, and also the probability of thunderstorms? My trail was on the ridge, so I was quite interested in that.
Those are all on the to-do list. A cloud cover one is actually something that we're looking into now, either as trying to decide if it should just be the percentage cloud cover or the cloud cover symbol. So we haven't decided yet. So that kind of stuff, we have a long list of stuff we want to do, and those are on it. So I guess watch this space. It's been a rush to get everything up and running in a short amount of time. We signed the contract in November and went live in March. So we're still kind of catching up on some of the things that we'd like to do. So really like anyone's ideas or comments, because just because it's not there right now doesn't mean that it won't be.
Any other questions? Nope. Awesome. Thanks very much, Nava.
Thank you.
Let's give a round of applause.